My name is Raja Leon Hamann. I was born and raised in Germany. I am Afro-German, a concept, an identity that is hard to fathom for many. When I tell people here in the US that I'm from Germany, they usually assume that someone in my family must have been military, which is not the case. And even in Germany, people typically ask where I was really from and compliment me on how well I speak German. My father is Nigerian and my mother is German. The dominant representation of Germany, of Europe for that matter, is white though. And things are changing, even if slowly, but still. David had asked me to speak to you about my experiences here and share some observations that I've made in Savannah and in the US in general. I am a PhD student in cultural and social anthropology doing research on Black liberation struggles in Gullah Geechee. This is what led me to the Lowcountry. Before I came to Savannah, I lived in Charleston for about 4 months. And it is curious, people said to me that I would like Savannah a lot and that it was different from Charleston. And of course, it is. It's a different place. The layout of a city is different, the architecture, the demographics. However, when you look beyond that, when you scrutinize the ways in which the city represents itself, the ways in which certain groups of people have a place in the public memory and others do not, and some are therewith included or excluded from the imaginations of the present and the future of society, then you will find that there's actually not such a great difference between Savannah and Charleston after all. Someone said to me that Savannah has always been a little bit behind Charleston, and that person was referring to Gullah Geechee being more present in the city of Charleston. And what Charleston is indeed doing more effectively is exploit the cultural capital of Gullah Geechee. Again, apart from that, when it comes to dynamics of both symbolic and socioeconomic marginalization, both places are very much products of the same concerted efforts to recreate the Old South, glorify the deeds and experiences of the white male colonialists, Confederates, and segregationists. When David and I first spoke with one another over the phone, he asked me to go to the Baobab Lounge, which is located in the Marriott Hotel complex at Riverfront Park. In light of what we had spoken about before, I had already expected something bad, but getting there I was still surprised. Surprised by how blatantly people of African descent, in particular natives in general, are being constructed as mere objects, accessories to the romantic and historic vibe of the city, and all of that in public. The Baobab Lounge is, as the name implies, a lounge. I think they have both drinks and food, which, given its location, is tailored towards the more wealthy. Now, imagine you enter the hotel complex. It's a brick building, perfectly air-conditioned, of course. You're coming into the east entrance. Turn to your left and walk towards what resembles a mall that is in there with different gift shops, jewelry, etc. On your way there, you notice fossils that have been attached to the walls and glass cases, petrified prehistoric snails and such. Coming into the mall, you see more of these exhibits on the walls and placed all across the space, as well as precious stones, large amethysts, and finally, you see the more than 30 feet long replica of a dinosaur skeleton hanging from the ceiling. You go on, and after you've crossed about 1/3 of the room, you notice 2 statues on your left, standing to the sides of the entrance of what you realize is the Baobab Lounge. The statue on the left is supposed to be a representation of a man of African descent, or possibly Native American, bare-chested with a strong, muscular body, carrying a spear and a shield. The statue on the right, a woman of probably African descent, again possibly Native American. The decisive term here is native and indigenous, obviously. Any people who are seen like that as primitive could be imagined there. The statue of the female is shown with a highly elaborate necklace, earrings, her breasts uncovered, her left arm wrapped centrally around her right hip. The dress that covers only her lower body appears as if it was about to slip, revealing parts of her thighs and of her pubic mound. The lounge itself is decorated with skulls of exotic animals, whether real or fake I cannot say, with zebra prints, leather, and close-up portraits of black people, likely African. I leave the interpretation of the scene to you. The last thing I would like to bring up is the representation of the sites of former plantations here in the U.S. David told me about his research on the ties between Nazi ideology, U.S. white supremacy, and colonialism, and how there is a continuity between these ideologies, how they in fact deeply inspire one another. He asked me to compare my experiences with sites of former concentration camps and death camps to the sites of former plantations here. Evidently, there are parallels, which are much too often not spoken about. All these were places of unimaginable torment, horror, violence, and subjugation, And even if in different ways, they were all about the destruction of people. Often the distinction is being made that the Holocaust was about the literal extermination of Jewish people, whereas enslavement was about exploitation. And that is, for the most part, a sound argument. However, there was more to both systems. Jewish people were exploited too, even after their deaths, through the appropriation of their homes, their assets. And they had been discriminated against for centuries already. And the enslaved people, which include both people of African descent and early on, Native Americans too, were literally worked to death, as they were seen as nothing but dispensable tools. This changed, of course, as the supply of Africans dried up with the abolition of the trade with enslaved people. Apart from that, crucially, enslavement was always about the destruction of the identities of the enslaved, the specific cultural identities and their very identities as human beings of equal value. And this is what we call cultural, symbolic, or psychological genocide. Coming back to the ways in which the sites of this attempted destruction are commemorated, most sites of former plantations have become tourist destinations, places that serve the reproduction of the narrative of a romantic, genteel, antebellum South. This reconstruction of the South was very deliberate and started in the late 19th and early 20th century, when the owners of these places sought to create new revenue streams and began inviting people to visit their grand estates. This kind of tourism to sites of former concentration camps and death camps would be unimaginable. Given the different time at which these atrocities were committed in Europe, and a very different perspective onto these events by the international community, these places have always been principally about mourning, reminding its visitors of the fatal errors of the past so that they may not be repeated ever again. And I personally, having visited these sites too, would say that they are indeed doing a better job than most sites of former plantations here in the U.S. at critically engaging with history. At the same time, it's not as if there were no problematic aspects at all. I visited Auschwitz in Poland, for example, and since so many people come there, it has to be highly organized, and it can feel a little bit as if you were just quickly guided through, rushed through almost, through the place. And when David and I spoke about that, he remarked that there might also be an element of visiting these places in order to experience horror as entertainment. And that may be the case for some people. I could very well imagine that, but I don't know. One of the greatest challenges or problems, actually, and this is something that David emphasizes all the time, as I understand it, is that the connection between these sites are not made visible. The Holocaust is commonly remembered in Germany and other majority-white populations as the single greatest crime against humanity, taken away from the singularity of enslavement, the genocide against Native Americans, colonialism, and other atrocities, and veiling how all of this is connected. It is crucial, both ethically and analytically, that we take a global perspective onto all of these crimes and, to paraphrase David yet again, see them as part of a larger history of dehumanization.